Okay. Hi, welcome to our live Q&A session with Dr. María Mendiluce. Dr. María Mendiluce is the Managing Director of Natural Capital. She has over 20 years experience in the energy and climate area. Since 2008, Maria has led the implementation of WBCSD's climate and energy strategy, guiding the work of over 200 member companies to influence the global climate landscape. Maria managed the development of the Low Carbon Technology Partnerships Initiative, one of the flagship projects leading up to the success of COP21. She created WBCSD's new program on circular economy and is now developing the new strategy for transport and cities. Prior to joining WBCSD, Maria held different roles at the International Energy Agency in Paris, Iberdrola, and the Economic Bureau of the Spanish Prime Minister in Spain. Maria teaches at the University of Geneva, coaches students, and is recognized for her contributions to scientific journals and international conferences. So welcome, Maria.
Thank you. Thank you.
So can you tell us a bit about your background?
Yes, well, as you rightly point, so I'm Spanish. I come from a city, Pamplona, in the north of Spain, and I studied there my degree on economics. And after that, I quickly moved to the IEA, the International Energy Agency, where I was working as an energy statistician for 4 years. And then after that experience, which was very useful because I got to work on understanding the energy balances, the CO2 inventories, and all sorts of statistics, then I moved to a power company, Iberdrola. Iberdrola is now probably one of the largest renewable energy companies. At the time it was starting its expansion of renewables, and I participated on that, and then I was part of the CEO staff and was helping in several matters, including financial roadshows, renewable energy strategy, and climate change strategy at the time. But that was around the end of the 90s, the beginning of the 2000s. So a lot has changed since then, no? And now the renewable energy has become a major pillar of the strategy of these companies, and so is their climate action activities. So after that, I decided that I wanted to do my PhD, and I moved to Geneva. And while I was doing my PhD, I was interested in working as advisor to the Spanish government in Madrid, which I did. I was advisor on sustainable development, and in that role, I did the first Spanish strategy on sustainable development, which also now it's a very renowned term, but back then, yeah, it was, well, not in the infancy, but it was not as popular as it is today. And after that, I started to work at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development since 2008. I have had several positions, but mainly what I have been doing is running the climate and energy activities. And that has involved the Low Carbon Technology Partnership Initiative, which I think we're going to talk a little bit later, and another driving the climate policy strategy of the 200 companies that are participating in the council. And since the past 2 years, I'm also in charge of the areas of circular economy and cities and transport. And there we are starting new programs, and it's picking up in terms of ambition. So there is a lot to be done still, and enjoying quite a lot the life here in Geneva.
Mm-hmm. So which sectors of those that you have worked with have done the most cutting edge work to decarbonize? Which have been the slowest, and what factors determine how those various sectors respond?
Well, I think the power sector at the moment is going through a big revolution because of the decreased price of renewable energy that makes the technology competitive and cheaper than fossil fuel in many geographies. And that's making a huge transformation in the energy system, in the way that electricity is produced, and also in the use that electricity can have in electrification of transport or electrification of heat. No? So I think that the sector, while it's a big sector that has a very long-term investment plans, it is rapidly changing. No? There are other sectors that have more difficulties in changing because is changing in terms of emission reduction potential. And in that respect, I would say that all those sectors, industry sectors that require a lot of heat to produce their products, whether it's cement, steel, have more difficulties. And if they want to be compliant with the Paris Agreement, the analysis of the IEA says that they should bring more carbon capture and storage, which is a technology that is yet not as deployed as it probably should, and as a consequence, it's more expensive than other alternatives. So I think, there are technology options always, but they are a little bit expensive for some sectors, and hence it's difficult to introduce those.
Okay, very good. So in the video you mentioned, and actually just in your introduction, you mentioned the Low Carbon Technology Partnership Initiative. What are the major challenges you faced launching that project?
Yeah, well, actually, it was not that difficult to launch the project, because at that time when we started the project, it was in 2014, and where all the companies and government had a very clear objective, which was to get a successful Paris Agreement. So in that respect, there was a movement that started then, and it had a lot of traction. And so as a consequence, we created this initiative, which involved at the time 140 companies, and until now we have had 180 companies that have been part of it. And these companies are working in 8 areas. They're working on renewables, on low carbon freight, on biofuels, which we call below 50, on cement, on buildings, on forest, agriculture, and chemicals. And they all have a common methodology. They said, okay, well, what the sector or the technology can do in the 2-degree scenarios? What are the barriers to achieve that ambition? And then what are the actions that as a group, the group wanted to make? No? And the group was composed between 10 and 20 companies for each of those areas. And the issue is that technologies exist, but there are many barriers to implementation, whether it's economic, because they're too expensive, whether it's regulatory, or whether consumers don't want to use those technologies. So we are trying to work out, and every year we select different barriers, and we work with companies in trying to create solutions to overcome those barriers. Inevitably, that requires a lot of engagement with the governments. And there, I suppose, is the challenge, because while we are all pursuing the same objectives, that is to reduce emissions, both business or governments have different constituencies that need to take into account, and political circumstances. No? And sometimes it is the dialogue between business and government, even if aligned, is not as productive as it should. No? And I think that there needs to be major efforts from both sides to try to work together and collaborate, because I don't think the climate change challenge can be done alone by neither of those, neither the public sector or the private sector. We have to do it. We need each other's, and we need to learn how to work with each other's.
Definitely. So we have a question from one of our watchers who says, what about the future price competitiveness in solar and wind power purchase agreements?
Well, so solar has done a dramatic decrease in the cost of the technology in the last years, and as I said before, it's competitive in many regions. No? And so I think the issue is not the competitiveness. The issue is now the reliability, because the sun doesn't shine all the time. So we need storage technologies that can keep the energy while the sun is not shining, and we can use it. No? And that's where the technological development needs to happen. Again, technologies exist, but they are very expensive. How can we bring the cost of those technologies down? And so I think, well, that is an issue. And the other issue is that because the power sector investments in different plants are they're very capital intensive industry, it is difficult for the industry to transform rapidly. And even if sometimes solar is cheaper than coal, for example, maybe a company or the country has made a huge investment on coal, and they cannot close the plant right away. No? And those are the sort of challenges that we're facing today, which we knew that they were coming, because I remember talking about this called stranded assets. I remember talking about this with the company back in 2010, 2011. Well, now it's a reality in many countries. And in many countries, they are closing down coal plants because there's no need for them anymore, because there's cheaper ways of producing electricity.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Okay. So what was the role of businesses, and how are the voices of businesses represented in drafting the Paris Climate Agreement?
Well, the Paris Agreement was negotiated and drafted by governments. And what business did at that time is to show that they were supporting an ambitious climate agreement. And that we believe that it gave confidence to the policymakers and the governments and the negotiators to have an ambitious program. So it is because the different delegation, they talk to the business and they realize that the business are ready to step up. Ready to step up, not because it makes business sense. It makes business sense because there's a technological transformation and there's new business opportunities. It makes business sense because the cost of not doing is really high. And the companies realize that the cost of adapting and being resilient to climate change is very high. No? And so they are responsible and they need to do something about it. And they need to do it now. So I think it was that alignment that made it successful, even though the private sector is not, didn't have any participation in the drafting or in the negotiations of the Paris Agreement.
Right. So you said that one of the biggest challenges is definitely integrating government and business to work together. So how can we integrate those better so that we can create and enforce better climate policy?
Yeah. Well, I think there needs to be a facilitated discussion between both, and to try to get an alignment of the different objectives. I think it is easy for governments and business to align on the long-term vision, and that's the 2050, so 2030. It's a long way. So we start with that, and then we come backwards. So once we agree on that vision, what needs to happen now, and what are the barriers? And I think it is a lot about building trust between the different governments and the private sector. It is about building a common language, because government talk a different language than business. And it is about establishing a trusted dialogue between the two parties so that we can come up together to the solutions. So it's not about imposing the solutions of the governments to business or vice versa. It's just about trying to figure out how to create solutions that get the most out of both sides.
Okay, definitely. So how can we get those companies that are not doing enough to adopt decarbonization strategies to do so? And what are the business risks that companies are facing when they don't take climate change into account?
So, yeah, well, I think there are interesting initiatives out there, like the science-based targets, which is helping companies acquire a science-based targets to reduce emissions in line with the Paris Agreement, with the 2 degrees. And I think, we should encourage more and more business to take science-based targets, because what is clear is that if we don't set those targets, the company and the people that are not, following these discussions will not have any incentive of doing this. But once the CEO of the company, agrees, yes, we need to have a long-term targets, and we need to figure out how to decarbonize the company operations. And we need to open the space for innovation within the company so that they come up with solutions that otherwise they will not come because it's not part of their objectives. No? So I think that's really important. And can you remind me the second part of your question?
Yeah, definitely. What are the business risks that companies are facing when they don't take climate change into account?
Well, I think there is the risk of the energy transition. So if a company doesn't take into account that there is a transformation of the energy system, that now we're moving more to renewable energy, and these companies are still investing in coal, at some point they're going to have stranded assets, and they're going to pay and to close plants where they have invested very recently. So that's a huge risk. And then there is the risk of the physical impacts of climate change can have in your company. And that's something that is difficult to predict. because there's certain uncertainties on when the extreme events are going to happen, when it's going to rain or not rain, and etc. No? But what is clear, what we have been seeing in the last few years, is that the temperatures are increasing, the ice poles are reducing, the sea levels are rising, extreme events are happening, there are droughts, there are fires, etc. So if you think, for example, in South Africa right now, there's not enough water in Cape Town, and so they're going to go into really heavy restrictions. And so that's for the tourism industry in this city, it has been something unbearable. It's so difficult. How can you tell your client that they cannot take a shower, no? And so what has the company done to that respect? You know, they should have included that as part of their risk, because they're going to lose a lot of money, because people are not going to go if they cannot have the normal access to water, no? So that's a good example that shows you, yeah, okay, you might think, okay, you're a tourist industry and you know what climate change has to do with you. Well, actually, yeah, a lot. And you better understand it. You better understand the risk that it has for your profit and loss account. I mean, it's business, huh? But also to the consequences that can have on your employees or on your clients. No, say for example, in the hurricanes in that now are the norm in the US. No, that happen every year, pretty much. I mean, those have an incredible impact, no, in terms of economic losses. I think it was 300 billion, no, for the US last year, and so I think the losses come from the property, but also from the fact that the people cannot go back to their homes and cannot restore their lives, which means that the business that were selling whatever products they were selling to those people are not going to be able to sell it because the people are not living there anymore because they don't have homes. No? So I think advanced companies are working with communities to help them be more resilient to climate change, because they want to help them, because they have their clients there, but also because it makes business sense. Because if those people, you know, did not come back to normal operation, they will not have business, they will not have a market there. Yeah. So I think, yeah, climate change impacts all, yeah, whether we like it or not. Yeah.
Right. How can companies continue to make sure that they're decarbonizing and looking at long-term solutions when they're dealing with the short-term impacts of climate change?
Yeah, well, I think, yeah, inevitably the world is very much on short-term status, no? And so yeah, I think it's difficult for companies that have that need to present their annual report every year or every quarter to look at this long-term consideration. But we do see some leading companies like Unilever, like AkzoNobel and others that are doing so, no? Because yeah, company success cannot be dependent only on your next term, but you need to have a long-term view on how the results are going to be. And climate change is going to impact those results. It's going to create opportunities for growth and also risks. And so I think serious companies would need to look at the long term, no? And see, you know, yeah, how can they adapt to climate change and how they can contribute to mitigate that climate change by reducing their own emissions. It's also they need to do it because regulation is going to come up, you know, because there is a Paris Agreement that now needs to be deployed into national regulation that will ask different companies, sectors to do their bit. And so I think companies need to anticipate those movements if they want to be competitive. No?
Yeah. Actually, we have a question from one of our viewers who runs a rooftop solar company based in New Delhi. And she says, India has extremely ambitious targets and decent policies in place, but implementation is poor, which makes said policies a hurdle. How do you suggest one tackle this problem from a practitioner's perspective?
Yeah. Well, I think it's challenging. I mean, in some ways, for example, on renewable energy, until very recently, the challenge was that renewable energy had some subsidies, some feed-in tariffs. And so companies were very dependent on those feed-in tariffs. No? But now what's happening is that the technology is cheaper. No? And then there are other barriers that companies need to overcome. But I suppose that now, thanks to these technology advancements, companies can be a bit more independent in putting it, installing these solar panels in different, whether it's a commercial building or a residential building, whether it's in an industry, because the technologies there are available, and it's not that it's forbidden to put them in place. But there are some challenges, challenges of connection to the grid sometimes, because the grid needs to be reinforced in order to integrate the amount of renewable energy that is produced in different locations. So certainly there are some challenges, and I suppose, at the end of the day, some of those depends. If the renewable energy, the solar panels have decreased their cost, and we are expecting that the government reinforces the grid so that solar company can bring that electricity to the grid, it might take a little bit of time. Maybe the company needs to change their strategy and say, well, actually, it makes sense for me to create a mini grid so that I can distribute this solar power to this town or to this village or to this industry. So I think the good thing about business is that they can innovate and they can find the solutions to problems. And so I don't think business should be or should fall to be too dependent on some government regulation. I should try to find a way to exploit these technologies that are competitive at the moment.
Okay. We have another question from a viewer who says, what policy interventions have been initiated by governments of various countries to decarbonize the economy since the base year 2005?
Well, that's huge.
Yeah, that is a big question.
I think a lot. So emission trading systems, for example, this is a possibility for companies to trade emission reductions in a market. The energy efficiency building codes, for example, so that buildings are mandated to include the latest energy efficient equipment. Standards in vehicles, for example, so that the emissions per kilometer are reduced. And you can continue. There's lots of things that have happened. I would recommend the viewer to look at the International Energy Agency, which does fantastic reports where they can summarize the latest climate energy policy interventions or climate policy interventions.
Okay, thank you for that. Another viewer says, how are solar power plant developers going to survive in the low electricity tariff market?
Yeah, well, I think it depends where those plants are located, and I think, it depends how low, if that price is lower than the cost of producing that electricity. I think in many cases the cost of producing electricity with solar panels is cheaper than the price that is paid in the residential areas, except maybe in some developing countries or where we need to provide first access to the grid. So I think technology is going to help to reduce the cost even further. And I don't think low electricity prices will last forever, because we need to introduce a carbon price, that prices the externalities, that prices the emissions of the coal generation or gas generation, and that will inevitably increase the price of electricity and will make solar more competitive. But I think there are many countries where even that carbon pricing is no longer needed because solar is cheaper than the current electricity prices.
Okay. So now we have a question. In your experience, what has been a successful strategy to really galvanize a mass citizen movement in favor of sustainability? So,
well, I think it's difficult because we live in a bubble. This is the bubble of sustainable development and climate change. So we tend to think that everybody thinks like us, but it's not the case. So I think the media has done an enormous job, and business as well, and governments, in raising awareness of the impacts of climate change. But it's still not understood by the large majority of the people living in this planet. So there is a lot to be done in raising awareness, in education, in helping people understand what it is, climate change, what is the impact that it can have on their life, help them become more resilient to climate change, but also them, change their lifestyle so that they can live in a world that is compliant with the Paris Agreement. I think social media, and we see the Facebooks and the Googles and these companies are doing also enormous work. No, they're walking the talk, and also they're using those platforms to convey the message that we need to do something about climate change. And unfortunately, the other issue that makes people understand that this is real is when there is an extreme event that happens. And unfortunately, we're going to see a few of them happening more and more often. So I think awareness is raising, but I think one thing is raising awareness, and the next step is how do people take action, no? And I think business and governments need to make it easier for consumers, for citizens, to understand how they can contribute to reduce emissions. Because for the time being, and even probably what I'm talking here today is very complex, technical, and maybe not everybody can understand. No? And so how can we make it simple so that people can make simple choices that would make this a better planet, reduce emissions, reduce environmental degradation, etc. No? I have hope because we see that the young kids are much more, they understand much more the situation, they understand some of the solutions, there is a good education that is that we're bringing to the young, and I would think to the millennials, and I think it is the older population, the ones that is less aware and more reluctant to learn. No? And so I think there's work to be done. But also on the other hand, I feel more and more when we talk about this issue, and you probably do as well when you talk to your friends at the university or wherever you talk, that this topic is someone where everybody has an opinion and they understand, they have heard about it, and they are concerned, no? To some point. Yeah.
Definitely. Along with the idea that, we need to raise awareness about climate issues, and that these big disastrous events are raising people's awareness. We have a question that says, climate change is happening quicker and worse than the IPCC predictions. Will you publicly declare a climate emergency to raise the levels of the ambition with the CEOs you are working with?
Yeah, well, I cannot do that, but I think there is a lot of CEOs that understand that this is a very serious issue. And in fact, the World Economic Forum Global Risk Report states that climate change is the largest global risk for business, for governments, for everybody. So, of course, I mean, we deal with large companies, and the SMEs, it's another story, and other businesses around the world, that do not have the resources or the time to be thinking about these issues. So, but in that respect, what I find that is interesting is that the large companies are asking their supply chains, so the smaller companies, to provide emission reduction potentials, to comply with certain regulations, and so the work that big companies can do in their supply chain can help raise awareness and ambition of the smaller industries in the fight to climate change.
Okay. We have another question that says, how can an island country like the Philippines take action to mitigate the effect of climate change?
Well, I think, there's going to be, they will need to build some protection. We have done some work here at the World Business Council talking about the natural capital infrastructure, how instead of building walls, you can build wetlands that can help mitigate the impact of high the sea level rise. Well, they can also use more renewable energy to power their energy, move to electric vehicles as well, and have and try to work together, as they are doing already with other small island states, to have a strong position and to try to increase the ambition from countries and, of course, companies to achieve the Paris Agreement in time, and to ratchet the emission reduction announcements that were announced in Paris, and that they need to be more ambitious, because they are not meeting all the NDCs. Is the national determined contribution only contributed to reduce the increase of temperature to 2.7 degrees at the most optimistic scenarios, and we need to bring it down to 2 or to even more. So there's a lot to be done in ratcheting the ambition. And of course, I mean, for some countries, this is very dramatic because it is threatening their life on these islands. So I think they need to be more vocal and build alliances with other countries that want to push for this ambition.
So what role can consumers play in ensuring that businesses become more sustainable?
Well, they have a key role to play because you can tell the companies what you want. What is the product that you? Yeah, in fact, you can be a committed customer that say, listen, I'm going to buy from these companies because they are not reducing emissions, because they are, polluting oceans, because in X, Y, and Z. No, I think the consumer goods brands they get it. And that's why you have the Unilevers, the Procter & Gamble's, the consumer-facing companies see that they need to act and they need to show to their clients that they're doing things about the environment. The issue is how do you engage the B2B, the business to business, those that are not facing the consumers, because consumers will pay a premium or will select the product that is more sustainable. Okay. But in a B2B situation, then sometimes the decisions are made more based on the price of the goods, and so I think that there is where we need to work harder, and that's what some companies are doing by introducing these commitments into the supply chain, so that their providers comply with certain emission standards and certain environmental requirements.
Okay, we have another question that says, your presentation mentioned the project presented to the International Transport Forum. This person believes that this made sense as an effort for productivity improvement. Are other business forums foreseeable, and would they have the same effect?
Yeah, well, I suppose, I mean, she's mentioning the work that we presented on the low carbon freight project. And so this was a very interesting project because what we did is we did that research to try to understand how we could reduce emissions in freight transportation by doing three things. The first thing, optimize the routes of one company, because the issue with freight is that the trucks go full to a destination, they download the goods, and then they come back empty. So it's not very efficient. So if you optimize the routes and they go to different places and pick up different goods, you need to optimize the use of the capacity of that truck to be more efficient. So if you optimize your own route, you can go a long way. But if you optimize shared routes, so if you talk to a few companies, say, okay, we're going to optimize our shared routes. So we put all our vehicles, are sharing routes so that we can draw, the algorithm will drive more efficient routes where those trucks will be used at maximum capacity and consuming, as a consequence, less energy per ton of transported goods. So, and then the third idea was to increase the delivery window from 2 hours to 5 hours, because now the Amazon, this thing of bring me the food in 1 hour is not sustainable. Because it means that you do a lot of empty runs. No, you go, deliver, come back, go, deliver, and come back, and that's not sustainable. But if you give more time, then it allows the algorithm to work on better optimization routes. And so that could reduce emissions by 52%, which is huge. 52% of freight emissions can be reduced by these three emissions. And what we have done now, we presented those results in the International Transport Forum, and then we say, okay, this is nice, this is good theory, but let's move to practice. So what we did is we got a grant from UK Innovate. What happens in reality. We know the theoretical analysis, but let's see how much emission reductions can happen in the real world, and that's what we're going to be working now.
Okay, definitely. So when it comes to INDCs, whether for nations or large corporations, what do you think can be put in place to make them accountable to the commitments that they have made?
Yeah, well, it's so in the end, it's made for countries, okay, and so a country will commit to reduce emissions, but it's true that there's no one that is going to penalize that country for the time being if they don't meet those emission reduction. No? And so it is more the peer pressure that they're going to receive in the climate negotiation for not standing up to the commitments. It's also the pressure from the citizens that will maybe feel embarrassed if the country does not fulfill its commitments, and so on. So the system is made up in a sense that those two forces will probably make countries comply with their commitments. But as I say, there's no penalty if they don't.
Okay, thank you. So, one second. How can business and people in the community work together to ensure sustainability?
Yeah, well, that's a very broad question, but I think, many companies are doing dialogues with their consumers or their employees to understand what sustainable development is and what they can do to contribute to it. No? And there's lots that they can do in many aspects. So it's not only climate change, it's also water. It is about recycling. It is about giving education. It's about gender equality. There's lots of things that business and the local communities are working together.
Yeah. Awesome. So we have one viewer who lives in San Francisco and is asking, with regard to the September 2018 conference, what do you hope to achieve, and will both NGOs and business leaders be invited to participate and present their points of view?
Yeah. Well, the idea, yes, this is a conference that is organized by Governor Brown, by I think Michael Bloomberg, by the UNFCCC, and I think his co-chair is another one, is Mahindra. It's an Indian company that has very ambitious climate targets. And there's going to be a combination of regional actions, what the regions or the cities are doing, what companies are doing, and what governments are doing. I mean, the fact that it's in the US, well, it is quite significant, and it will be challenging some of the decisions that have been made by the current administration. No? It will probably show that cities can go fast sometimes, and I think it will be interesting to see, how fast they can go, how much they can achieve by themselves. No? I think business and we, the World Business Council, will be going to San Francisco, and we will be trying to position our member companies, the leading member companies, in different panels so that they can show and share their best practice and show their ambition to climate change emission reduction. And I think what it would be good if we could build more of those linkages that I mentioned before between the public sector and the private sector, to work together on some of these big challenges that we have ahead.
Yeah, definitely. But so do you believe that historically major producers like the carbon majors from carbonmajors.org have a special duty to contribute to financing? And if so, are they meeting it? And how do you think that they can be convinced to meet it?
Well, I think the thing is, when do you start history, And because many of those companies have been providing basic services and have allowed the population to grow, people to have access to transportation and to be able to access jobs and economic opportunity. And so they have been providing a good service to the communities for many, many years. And for many, many years, they didn't understand that there was some environmental implications from those. Then there's a moment when companies start to understand, okay, wow, I'm selling whatever product and this is producing GHG emissions that are bad for the environment. What can I do to reduce them? No? Because they cannot, some of those companies cannot stop from one day to the other to start to do business, no? For investing reason, but also because people still need to move around and they need to drive their cars. They need to have electricity at home. They need to have electricity at hospitals. So it's not as simple as, okay, let's tell the carbon majors to pay, for all the emissions they have done, because it's not as simple as that. No? I think what is clear is that now we all know that fossil fuels create emissions create climate change can have enormous impact on society, and so I think historical responsibility should start now, 10 years ago, when this knowledge has been available, and it has given time to companies to react to it and to be compliant with the Paris Agreement, which is the 2 degrees maximum increase of temperatures pre-industrial level, which is what the scientific community believes that is what we must try to achieve to keep this planet a safe place to live. No? So, and that's why it's important, this initiative that I mentioned before on the science-based targets, to figure out how much each company needs to do to be compliant with Paris. And the issue is also how can we accelerate the transformation that is needed to achieve those objectives, if possible, ahead of time, because we are already suffering from climate change. We are 1.1 degree higher temperature than pre-industrial levels, and we're already experiencing the consequences of this. So it's only going to continue now. And so I think, yeah, there's a clear urgency. We need to act really quick.
So in order for businesses to participate, they must have the financing to do so. What platform do you think is the most appropriate for that? Would that be research and development like Mission Innovation, or insurance for vulnerable companies, or getting companies to work together like the LCTPI?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't think so. The financing the transformation of the different systems, will not happen at these platforms. What these platforms can provide is opportunities to reduce and improve the enabling frameworks that will facilitate the investment in clean technologies in different sectors. And that's what they are in for. At the end of the day, what will help companies get the financing that is needed is that there is a business case, that there is a consumer demand, that there is the business opportunity, and that's something that we need to achieve through removing the barriers that I mentioned before.
So now we have a question from a viewer who says, there is a lot of fanfare around multilateral bodies like the World Bank extending financing support to developing countries. Typically, this does not trickle down to the SMEs as the riders act as roadblocks. So he says, how can we rectify this so that support does not go unutilized?
Yeah. So I think we have I think the SMEs, I think it must be very difficult because there's small companies, they need to do business, and they don't have the resources to be thinking about this long-term view, climate change plans, etc. No? And so I think governments and big business need to help the smaller business and provide them tools so that they can do this within the resources that they have available. Regulation can also have a long way because they will help businesses. They will put in place mandatory commitments for business to do X, Y, and Z, or standards for buildings, or standards for vehicles, etc. So that will oblige those SMEs to act upon. And with a bit of education, a little demand pull from the consumers, regulation push from the governments, we could move the SMEs to act more.
Okay, thank you so much. So I think that's basically all the questions we have for today. Do you have anything else that you'd like to share with us?
No, I think it's been very interesting to talk to all of you. I hope you're enjoying the module. I hope you're motivated to do something, and that you're motivated to do something with intelligence and in a collaborative manner, because as I said before, the challenges that we're facing cannot be tackled alone. So I think you're doing the right thing. First, get education, understand the issues. Second, think about what are the solutions. And third, work collaboratively to implement some of those solutions in whatever you are and in whatever role you have.
Okay. Thank you so much, Maria. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.